Anyone who's been around this channel for any length of time can probably tell one really obvious thing about me, that I'm a terrible goblin man. Also that I really like superhero stories. This is hardly a new or novel thing, superhero stories are the new white bread of media these days. But my interest is not confined to just movies or animated series or video games. Oh no, I'm one of the few degenerates left on planet Earth that regularly reads comic books.
Oh! Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
I know, it's a filthy and disgusting habit and I really should quit, but, well, I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship of some sort. I love superhero comics and no matter how hard they beat me, I'll always come crawling back. Fortunately, I've managed to retain some of my sanity by only focusing on runs that I've heard good word of mouth on, or things that are not expressly tied to the mainline continuity. Immortal Hulk was so goddamn good it managed to single-handedly restore my faith in the industry. But there are occasions, however rare, where I'll check something out not because it has good word of mouth, but because it has such awful, terrible word of mouth that I simply have to know what has everyone's jimmies so thoroughly rustled. And that brings us to the topic of today's video. Because if there's one character who is absolutely suffering under bad writing, now more than ever, it is most definitely Spider-Man. For a little bit of backstory, while there are many superhero characters that I really love, Spider-Man undoubtedly is at the absolute top of the totem pole for me. Back in ye olden days, when I was just a wee youngster, I was absolutely enamored with the 90s animated cartoon, and when the Raimi movies came out after that, I thought they were the absolute pinnacle of cinema. You know what? They still are. And yes, that includes the third one.
See you, chump. What the hell?
And when the Insomniac game came out, I absolutely injected that shit into my veins. He's just a character that works really well in just about every form of media. Spider-Man himself is great, his design and powers are iconic and cool, his supporting cast are great and memorable, and dare I say it, he has some of the best villains in all of media. Yeah, you heard me, Batman fans. I think Spider-Man has a better rogues gallery than Batman. What are you gonna do about it? Like, comment, and subscribe? I'd like to see that. My point ultimately being that if there's a piece of Spider-Man media out there, I'm likely going to check it out at some point or another, except for his mainline comic book. Spider-Man in comics has been languishing for quite a while now, but under the current writing of Zeb Wells, I think it's safe to say we've hit rock bottom. To give a brief rundown about why this run is so contentious, let's look at some of Zeb Wells' biggest sins. Firstly, and perhaps most controversially, was him breaking up Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson in the first issue of his run after Nick Spencer spent so long in his run trying to put them back together as a couple. Yes, this iconic decade-spanning relationship that a lot of people are really passionate about has once again been ripped in two for some cheap, clickbaity drama. God bless you, Nick Spencer. Whatever other faults your run might have had, at least you tried. Instead, MJ is now dating Paul.
Who?
You know, Paul. That iconic character that absolutely everyone loves. Honestly, calling Paul a character feels like an insult to the concept of character writing. He's less a person and more of a cheap plot device that exists solely to separate these two characters. And no amount of cheap, tacked-on backstory will ever turn him into anything other than the physical embodiment of Marvel editorial. As egregious as it is that Zeb Wells started his run by resetting Spider-Man's continuity and once again making him into a total goddamn loser, his sins extend far beyond that. Perhaps most egregious to me personally is Wells' insistence on writing Spider-Man as a completely clueless wimp whenever he's in a fight. I mean, honestly, just take a look at this absolute clown sequence where Spidey is getting his shit pushed in by the Vulture of all characters. The Vulture. The guy who's older than Joe Biden and has no powers beyond flying at people. Like, just imagine a Batman story where Batman's fighting the Penguin one-on-one and he's absolutely getting his ass kicked by a dumpy short man. Like, you know something's wrong there just when I describe it to you, you know? And it's not just in fight scenes where he has a tendency to write Spider-Man as if he's some inexperienced dumbass who became a superhero last week. Just check out this page where he's trying to ask Black Cat out on a date. My man is nearly having a panic attack doing this. I mean, come the fuck, he's done this before, this isn't new to him. Oh golly gee willikers, I'm talking to a pretty lady, aw geez Rick, I sure hope the spaghetti doesn't go flying out of my pockets. Honestly, it's like the man has gone out of his way to make Spider-Man as lame as possible in every way he can possibly think of. And that's without getting into other issues with his run, like the fact that he writes other characters as being massively out of character like the Fantastic Four, or pulling a cheap rating stunt like killing Kamala Khan in the pages of his book and not, say, a Miss Marvel book, even though she and Spider-Man basically have no relationship with each other. And, most recently, there's going to be this upcoming arc where Spider-Man becomes a goblin for no particular reason. Boy, I wonder if this is a decision that's been inspired by any other incredibly stupid characters out there. So, yeah, Zeb Wells' run, it's every bit as miserable as I'd been led to believe it would be. For whatever criticisms I could level at Nick Spencer or Dan Slott's runs, at least I never got the impression they actively hated the character in the same way I get from Zeb Wells. Just take a look at how Chip Zdarsky, an actually good writer, handles Spider-Man in the middle of his Daredevil run, and it's like looking into Bizarro World. But for as bad as Zeb Wells' run is, it didn't just appear out of a vacuum. Rather, it's the culmination of years of bad decisions tied to Spider-Man as a character that have come to their logical conclusion. The problem can broadly be defined as nostalgia-blinded writers who are deathly afraid of moving even remotely past a certain point in the status quo. That point being, Spider-Man as a single loser who barely has any friends and would die if Aunt May was out of his line of sight for more than 5 seconds. For one example of this nostalgia blindness I'm referring to, let's take a brief look at Mary Jane. I quite like Mary Jane as a character. I think she's fun and cool and has a lot of personality. Quite a lot of people seem to really like Mary Jane as a character. From the Raimi movies through to the Spider-Verse movies and a lot of the video games, Mary Jane is seen as Spider-Man's girlfriend in the eyes of the general public in much the same way Lois Lane is commonly seen as Superman's girlfriend. So yeah, I think it's safe to say a lot of people really like Mary Jane. Except for writers at Marvel Comics who fucking hate Mary Jane the same way they hate all women. I mean, I'm not reading that out loud for obvious reasons, but like, you get the point. But why is that? Well, for some of the people working at Marvel, when they were reading Spider-Man as kids, Gwen Stacy was the girlfriend, and so they hate Mary Jane on principle because she came after Gwen Stacy. Why yes, this is an ancient waifu war. Rei versus Asuka for people who grew up in houses full of asbestos and lead paint, and that's certainly reflected in the quality of their writing. And so, over the years, a lot of these writers have dedicated time to writing Gwen as this infallible, saintly figure that Peter is still obsessed with, while also taking the time to regularly attempt character assassination on MJ. I think, personally, the most brazen example of this bullshit came about in the House of M storyline, a story where every character was put into a paradise world that fulfilled their deepest desires. And what was apparently Spider-Man's deepest desire was not to be married to Mary Jane, which he was at the time in canon, it was to be married to Gwen. If that ain't editorial brazenly publishing their own personal preferences, I don't know what is. And this comes well after they published another story where it was revealed that Gwen had had sex with Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, and had secret kids with him. Yeah, really. An egregiously awful story that took years to be retconned out. Chad Spencer strikes again. But even so, the fact that it was allowed at all really says a lot about the kind of quality control Spider-Man has in terms of comic books. Years spent denigrating Mary Jane as a character in favor of another character who's also been written like dog shit at the same time. Wonderful. And it doesn't stop there. I'm sure at least some of you have seen Across the Spider-Verse, and in that movie you've seen Spider-Man's daughter, Mayday. You wanna know what she's like in canon? Yes, Marvel hates the idea of Spider-Man being married with kids so much that they introduced canon infanticide to one story where Mayday was killed off-screen.
Everyone hated that baby.
Hated a baby?
But, you may be asking, if Marvel editorial has it out for Mary Jane this bad, why don't they just, kill her off or write her out of the story entirely? Well, ultimately that ties into the second big issue that has been plaguing Spider-Man comics and arguably Marvel as a whole for a while now, their love of controversy. See, some time ago, Marvel found out that if they publish stories that people don't like or are controversial in some way, it's bound to generate a whole lot of word-of-mouth discussion and, from there, generate a healthy amount of sales for said controversial story. And, well, there's certainly some merit to that school of thought, for as controversial as this run is, people are talking about it every time a new issue comes out. Yes, I know I'm partially contributing to the problem, but these things need to be discussed. And so, while I'm sure many writers on Marvel's side do want to kill Mary Jane off, it's ultimately more profitable to keep people mad about dumb shit like Paul or keep them speculating about the possibility of one more day being undone. Which I have to say is unlikely to ever happen unless sales figures are absolutely in the toilet. My apologies to anyone who is still huffing copium on that end. And so that's basically the whole situation in a nutshell. Spider-Man is trapped in a Groundhog Day loop of bullshit because of vindictive, nostalgia-blinded editorial. People who love to ferment controversy and actively despise something that quite a lot of people would like to see come back. So, can we ever hope for things to improve for Spider-Man in the comics? Well, I wouldn't really hold my breath, but hey, never say never.